Ariadna se graba en un lugar privilegiado, en el monasterio budista de Pedreguer. Hemos venido a entrevistar a su santidad Sakya Trizin, la segunda autoridad mundial en el budismo después del Dalai Lama, uno de los maestros de maestros, uno de los grandes yogis de la tradición mahayánica, que nos hablará en profundidad del budismo y de la respuesta que el budismo puede dar en un momento de gran conflictividad mundial. Quería agradecer el honor y la alegría espiritual que siento por poder entrevistarle. Muchas gracias.
Before we begin, I would like to thank you for the honor to interview you and the joy, the spiritual joy I feel to be in your presence. Thank you so much.
Usted habla, su santidad habla siempre que para recibir la enseñanza lo primero es establecer la motivación correcta. ¿Cuál es la motivación más correcta que debería alimentar todas nuestras acciones, pensamientos y palabras?
Your Holiness, you often teach that to receive initiation and to receive teachings, we should first develop a good motivation. What is the pure, proper motivation that we should develop?
Yes, if one has bad motivation, then it is more harm than the benefit. But if you have no good or bad motivation, also then no use. But if you have a good motivation, then receiving one line of teaching or doing 1 minute of practice has a great benefit. The good motivation also, there are many different levels. Some people practice for higher rebirth. The fear of falling down in the lower realms and seeking higher rebirth is a good motivation, but it's not the higher motivation. Then some people motivation is that the entire samsara is full of suffering and wish to renounce and get a liberation, but for oneself only. This is also, of course, very good motivation, but not the highest. So the highest motivation is just oneself is suffering. Every sentient being also has suffering. So in order to save every sentient being, not oneself alone, but every sentient beings from the suffering and place them to the happiness, seek enlightenment. And that is the highest motivation.
¿Y todo hombre puede aspirar a esa motivación más elevada? ¿O hay distintos tipos de hombres?
And every human can aspire to this pure motivation, or are there different types of individuals and some have a certain level of motivation and some?
Yeah, of course, not everyone can do. So that's why there are 3 different kinds of one. In the spiritual path, you have what we call small person, middle person, and great person. But we should try at least to everybody to lead them to the great person's path.
El mundo agoniza en guerras y catástrofes ambientales porque hemos buscado o basado la felicidad en el éxito material y los placeres mundanos. ¿Qué piensa el budismo del actual estado del mundo?
So today the world is suffering due to wars, due to environmental catastrophes, due mainly for seeking happiness in successful material gain and also in mundane pleasures. So what does Buddhism think about the actual state of affairs in the world?
Yes, as time goes, this is the dark age, and people have excess defilements. So that's why that we have wars and climate and this environmental problems. It is all due to the excess defilements. People's minds are too greedy, too angry, and too jealousy, and too pride, and so therefore it creates all the problems. So the Buddhism tried to teach how to reduce our inner negative emotions, and so that there will be real effect on the worldly level.
Contesta un poco a la pregunta de si el mundo moderno ha olvidado su dimensión espiritual por ciclos cósmicos, ¿no? De la oscuridad a la luz. ¿Cuáles serían los principales oscurecimientos que nublan nuestra auténtica naturaleza?
What are the principal obscurations that, or defilements that obscure our true nature?
There are two kinds of obscurations. One is called the obscuration of the defilement, which is basically the ignorance, not knowing the reality. Instead of seeing the reality, that we cling as a self without any logical reasons, and then from there arises, when you have the self, then there's the others. So when you have the self and others, then there's a desire, anger, pride, jealousy, etc. So that is one part. And that is one obscuration. Another obscuration is the obscuration of phenomena, which means the conceptual thoughts that constantly are rising all the time, that we have a stream of thoughts that are all constantly rising. So these two are the two main obscurations.
¿Qué es el yo? ¿De dónde surge y por qué nos aferramos desesperadamente a su identidad? ¿Terror al vacío de no ser? ¿Hay algo más allá del yo que nos quite ese miedo a desaparecer, la identidad ilusoria del yo?
And what is the self actually? Where does it arise from? And why are we so desperately attached to some form of identity? We have this certain fear of the voidness, of not being. So what is the true self, this illusory self? How can we define it?
Yeah, in the teachings they said there is no self. So that's why we can't find, how much you search, you can't find the self, because there's no self. But we have a very strong habitual tendency that builds up for life of so many lifetimes, so that we all have a natural tendency to cling as a self based on focusing on our aggregates as form and feelings, etc., which are many, and so that we focus on that, then that we cling as a self. But if you try to search where is the real self, that you cannot find anywhere. But at the same time that we cling, we have a very strong clinging to it, because we have such a strong habitual tendency.
Si no hay un yo, entonces, ¿qué es lo que transmigra? ¿Qué continúa después de la muerte viajando en el samsara?
If there's no self, what transmigrates from one life to another? What is that which travels in samsara?
The continual consciousness. Consciousness, the mind is constantly changing, but it is the same line that goes on. So that it is different minds every time. It's different, because when we are as baby and when we are as adult, the mind is very different. When we are as baby and when we are as adult. But it is the same non-continual, never stopped, and it is the same line, just like the river. Yesterday's water and today's water is different, but it is never stopped, and it is the same line. So that's why we could still remember when we are as a baby. And so that line of continuity of the same kind of consciousness that goes into the next life.
Si las cosas no suceden sin causa ni condiciones, ¿cuál es la causa de la aparición de la mente? ¿Y tiene causa la naturaleza del Buda?
So if nothing can arise without a cause or condition, then what is the cause of mind? How does mind arise? And related to this, what is the cause of Buddha nature, of Tathagata Karma?
Mind, I think the cause is the karmic karmas that we have planted in the past. The propensity is on the mind, so that and the other conditions that create the mind. And Tathagata is the true nature of the mind. The true nature of the mind is the clear light, basic clear light that everyone has, and that every phenomena has the relative side and absolute side. And this absolute side, the relative side, is what we are seeing, what we think, but that is only relative. That is interdependent origination. Then when things get together, it appears. But the absolute level is the phenomena that is complete non-dual of clarity and emptiness, and it is beyond speech, beyond description, such a thing, such a clear light, and that is the Buddha nature.
Uno de los sufrimientos más extendidos y quizás menos conocido que el sufrimiento emocional y el físico es el existencial. ¿De qué está hecho esa aflicción ontológica y profunda que para algunos es consciente y para otros es inconsciente?
One of the sufferings that is more prevalent but least known, apart from the emotional and the physical suffering, is the existential suffering. So this basic root suffering that is the core issue that mostly lies unconscious. We're not aware of it. In the Buddhist context, it would be the third level of suffering. No?
Yes, yes. Conditioned nature of also. Yes, this is difficult to see for ordinary person, because that our very existence itself is a suffering. But we do not, ordinary people, it is difficult to recognize or to see it. But the persons who have the omniscient wisdom, then they can see it. And so that this is the very base of it, because that it is kind of it's not on the surface, it's on the underneath.
Una de las causas del sufrimiento es la impermanencia de los fenómenos. Todos quisiéramos morar en un lugar calmo y quieto, pero ¿se puede asumir la impermanencia de los fenómenos y a la vez celebrar la belleza efímera con desapego?
One of the principal causes of sufferings is impermanence, the impermanence of phenomena. And because we would all like to live or abide in a state that is peaceful and quiet. So is it possible to accept the reality of impermanence and at the same time live with detachment in a joyous state?
The joys, the ordinary joys and ordinary happiness that which we consider is impermanent, and so therefore it is suffering. It's not a real joy. It is appears like happiness and joy, but in reality it is another form of suffering. because it's going to change one day and it's not permanent, so therefore it is a suffering. So the real joy is that when your mind is free from the obscurations, there you get the real rest and the real joy.
Entonces, si uno tiene un sincero anhelo de conocer esa auténtica felicidad y busca un método para practicar, ¿cómo saber el método que le está destinado? Lo que hablábamos antes, y no caer en un turismo espiritual que va picoteando de una tradición a otra tradición.
So if one has a sincere wish to seek out this truth and to learn the nature of phenomena, and one seeks out a method to practice to reach that result, how does one know which method is appropriate for one? What method is destined for us to practice?
It depends on the individuals. That some people like very elaborate things, elaborate practice, elaborate deities, elaborate practice, and some people are like a simple practice. So whatever one is inclined from our own judgment, that one should choose.
Usted dice, en la siguiente página ya, que la síntesis del Dharma es evitar los actos no virtuosos y realizar actos virtuosos. ¿Cuáles son las principales virtudes que se cultivan en el budismo? ¿Hay una moralidad intrínseca e universal en el hombre? ¿O nada es correcto o incorrecto, independiente de su contexto?
You often say that to synthesize or to summarize what is Dharma, it is the practice of avoiding non-virtuous acts and adopting virtuous acts. So what are those principal virtues that we should cultivate according to Buddhism? And is there a morality or a discipline or conduct that is inherent in human beings? Or is it just contextual, that there is no good and bad apart from the relative reality?
Bad is the negative deeds is the arising from the defilements such as like desire, anger, and ignorance are all non-virtues, and that it causes the sufferings. So that is the negative deeds that we must abstain. And then the virtuous deeds means deeds that are not arising from the defilements, and that the deeds are arising from the altruistic or the loving kindness, the compassion, and the tolerance. So from such deeds are the good deeds that rises all our happiness and joy. So therefore we must practice as we are all, everyone is seeking happiness. But that is only for the basic level. When you first enter the Dharma, then you have to first thing is to abstain from the non-virtuous deeds and to practice the virtuous deeds. And then as you go on a higher level, then of course is a different thing. In the higher level, as I said, but our nature is, I think, virtuous. Our natural, especially the human mind, our natural thing is a virtuous.
Dentro del budismo Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, la metodología del Tantra para remover esas emociones aflictivas y esa ignorancia, ¿nos podrían decir cuál es la práctica principal o las prácticas principales de este camino, de esta escuela? Sí.
So, within the context of Vajrayana, according to the Sakya tradition, what is the principal method one employs to correct all the afflictive states, all the emotional afflictions, and so forth?
Vajrayana is actually very vast. Vajrayana itself also has many different levels. But in Vajrayana, basically that we turn all the samsaric things into a practice, in everything into the, because for example, like poison is harmful, but if you know the right methods, if you know the skillful means, you can turn the poison a very effective medicine. But if you eat the poison as it is very harmful. But if you use the poison in skillful ways and turns into medicine, then it is very helpful. So the Vajrayana is like this. But it is also dangerous, because if you don't know the skillful means, then of course still is very harmful. But if you know the right method and the right ways to use, then it's very helpful and effective.
Entonces se me surge una pregunta. Cada vez hay más occidentales, es casi al final, que sin ser budistas repiten mantras budistas como el Om Mani Padme Hum, con diversas y variadas intenciones, pero sin comprender lo que se recita. ¿Tiene sentido desde el punto de vista budista recitar sin comprender, sin tener en cuenta el propósito final y la motivación, sin estar refugiado en la iniciación del budismo?
And related to this, I wanted to ask you, every day there are more foreigners, Westerners, who are not Buddhists, but still recite mantras, the famous Buddhist mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, with their own intentions, very diverse, different intentions, without comprehending the meaning of what they're reciting. So my question is, does it make sense from the Buddhist perspective to recite the mantras without comprehending and without knowing the final result of the initial aspiration?
Yes, because if you don't know and if you have no right motivation, it could not give you the right result, obviously, and there's no right result. But at the same time, that you make a very strong connections, karmic connections, so that eventually they will be able to, even those who don't know and who are using in the wrong way or whatever, but they make the connection so that eventually they will be able to enter the path, I feel.
Uh-huh. Y uniéndolo también en el capítulo de la compasión, dentro del movimiento de mindfulness que ha popularizado el budismo, si no se lo dejo aquí, se utiliza mucho la autocompasión. Pero Shantideva decía, todo el sufrimiento viene de quererse a uno mismo, más que a los demás. ¿Cuál sería la práctica correcta hacia el sufrimiento de uno mismo, la autocompasión, como la entiende el mindfulness, para no fortalecer un yo que debe de ser desmontado?
So, according to this movement, this present-day movement called mindfulness, this secular meditation movement, they use the term self-compassion. And this seems as a therapeutic method to help us psychologically, to feel better and to deal with our psychological issues. And this seems to contradict Shantideva's quote that all suffering comes about from wishing our own happiness. So my question is, how can we practice correctly self-compassion, attending to our own suffering without fortifying the self, without making the self stronger?
I think the temporary relief we can get from anywhere, like even food. When you are hungry, if you eat the food, you get relief, you get any benefit. So likewise, temporary relief, this self-compassion also can give, but it, as what Shantideva is saying, is in the long run, in the bigger sense, real happiness. But this self-compassion could not bring the real happiness. It can only maybe benefit temporary reliefs.
También dentro de las prácticas que se hacen mindfulness, su santidad dice que antes de meditar en la compasión hay que tomar refugio en los tres tesoros. ¿Se puede practicar karuna sin ser budista? ¿Se puede soportar llevar la carga del sufrimiento de todos los seres sin el refugio de una iniciación?
And Your Holiness, I think you have said that before meditating on compassion, it is best to take refuge, to go for refuge in the three jewels. Can a non-Buddhist practice karuna, practice compassion? Is that possible? Can one support the heavy weight of suffering of other beings without the benefit of this proper refuge through ritual?
Yes, I think the Buddhism is very vast and profound, and there are many things. Of course, proper entering the Buddhist path, you have to do the right way. But for non-Buddhists, they can take many lessons from the Buddhist teachings. His Holiness the Dalai Lama divides Buddhism as into three categories: the Buddhist science, Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist religion. Buddhist religion is strictly for the Buddhist practitioners, only Buddhist practitioners. That way you have to take refuge and do everything. But the Buddhist science, which means describing how things, how everything, how phenomena is formed, etc. And the Buddhist philosophy, which is like all the relative and absolute, etc. So that, he said, every Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist science, anybody, even non-Buddhists or even non-believers, can take advantage of entering into and practicing it.
¿Por qué la compasión es la raíz de las enseñanzas mahayanas, la práctica esencial para alcanzar la budeidad? En el capítulo de compasión.
And why is compassion the root of the Mahayana teachings, an essential ingredient to reaching enlightenment?
Because Mahayana means devoting fully to the other sentient beings. So that cannot be without compassion. So therefore, the core or the main root is compassion. Without compassion, you cannot practice any Mahayana practices. Because Mahayana means whatever teachings we receive, whatever practices we do is for the benefit of others. Not for the ones that are alone, but for the benefit of all other sentient beings.
En Occidente se ha popularizado la idea de la reencarnación y hay mucha gente que piensa que es muy fácil obtener una vida humana. Me gustaría saber si nos podría ayudar a valorar el tesoro que es realmente y lo difícil que es obtener ese preciado tesoro.
In the West, we're becoming more and more familiar with the concept of rebirth or reincarnation, but it's assumed that it's very simple or easy to achieve a human rebirth. So can you help us appreciate the difficulty of gaining this precious opportunity and what it entails? Yes,
of course, if you look away, but there are a lot of people. There are so many people. In fact, we have overpopulation problems. But if we think carefully, compared with other living beings, the human beings are very few. And especially the human life, which is endowed all the prerequisite, is extremely few. And so that's why everything is kind of relative, it's depending on each other. when you compare with other living beings, the human beings are very few.
Entonces, ¿qué nos recomendaría para poder obtener méritos, para poder alcanzar ese preciado tesoro tan escaso?
And Your Holiness, what is your advice for gaining the merits, creating the causes and conditions to gain this future human precious life? How can we achieve it in the future?
To get a human life, one needs to practice virtuous deeds, and especially the good moral conduct, which means abstaining from the non-virtuous deeds, such as like the killing and stealing and lying, etc. And if you do that, then it will cause to be born as a human beings.
Cuando uno lee su descripción de los 3 tipos de infierno, uno se queda aterrorizado. Ahora se lo paso. ¿Son metáforas de estados de la mente o realmente existen como lo describen los sutras? ¿Cómo convertir ese temor en una motivación que nos impulse a la práctica en vez de quedarnos paralizados ante la dimensión de...
When we read about the description of the different types of hell realms, we are very frightened. So are these taken as a metaphor, an analogy for different mental states, or do they really exist out there as they are described in the sutras? So my question would be that, and also how to use this fear, of the hell realms to motivate us correctly in the path without being paralyzed by that fear.
According to the Buddhist philosophy, nothing is out there, and nothing is out there. Everything is actually project of our own mind. Even this life, which is very important to us. For example, if we fail in this world, it's a great suffering. If you success, it's a great joy. But this is also not real. This is also illusion. So as the hell realm is also not out there, there's no outside existing. But while we are, if one falls in the hell realm, it is as real as this. So to use this fear to make sure that we don't commit negative deeds, and we practice the virtuous deeds. So that's how we should use this fear of falling down in the lower realms.
Para no fatigarle más, ¿crees que puedo hacer alguna más? Sí. Ante la actual crisis medioambiental, ¿qué consejos, qué enseñanzas podemos sacar del budismo? ¿Cuál es su posición ante esta crisis medioambiental y cómo podríamos implementar nuestro cuidado, que aumente nuestra...
So, within the context of the environmental crisis that we're facing as humanity, what can we do as individuals in the spiritual sense or in practical means? What is your view or Buddhism's view about how to improve the situation?
I think the whole problem comes from the negative emotions, inside negative. When people become very greedy, that creates all the problems. So, first of all, I think outside external problem to solve the problem, everybody should be aware of the danger of the environmental problems, especially for the future generations. So that everybody must have the responsible to protect the environment. And more deeper ways that we must have satisfaction and not too greedy, so to make such problems. So with these two, I think can solve the temporary problem as well as the long-run problems.
Y una última pregunta, si me permite. Debido a esta crisis medioambiental hay un ambiente como apocalíptico y hay muchas tradiciones como el hinduismo que señalan que es Kali Yuga, el final de los tiempos. ¿El budismo tiene algún tipo de consideración profética o señala que realmente estemos en un final de un ciclo, de un tiempo?
And related with the environmental crisis, there are many people that have taken an apocalyptic view of reality, and there are many religious traditions that speak about the end of a cycle. So does Buddhism also have any prophecies regarding our immediate or long-term future?
There are many prophecies, but sometimes it's difficult to comprehend the meaning. But basically I myself is optimistic. So I don't believe that there will be an end of the world.
O sea, que tenemos mucha tarea entonces que realizar.
So we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Muchísimas gracias, Su Santidad, por aceptar esta entrevista.
So thank you so much, Your Holiness, for having accepted this interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Y si quiere añadir algo más, usted quiere preguntar algo, estaremos encantados de enriquecer.
And if you would like to say a few words for the Spanish audience, some way to help them in their daily life and also in their practice, if you could.
I found Spain a very great country, very rich in soil and climate, and everybody loves Spain. Everybody comes here for holidays. I also enjoyed being here, and so I love to say to the people of Spain that whichever faith or whatever philosophy that we are in, basically I think it is very important to make ourselves a good human being. The good human being means that someone who makes oneself happy and also benefit others. Then our life is purposeful and benefit. And so on the basis of that, then whatever individual believes, whichever tradition that one follows, can do it most successfully. Without being a good human being, whichever tradition, whichever spiritual traditions one follows, whatever practice you do will not be successful. So therefore, everyone should make a good human being. That means that oneself happy and not harm on anybody, and instead benefit others.
Thank you so much, Your
Thank
Holiness.
you.